Hello, I'm Kiva from Tiny Nest.
And I'm Jake. If you're familiar with us, you'll know that we built our own tiny house from scratch after making great use of the free 3D modeling software SketchUp. We know firsthand the power it has to translate an idea into a virtual space and then into the real world. As amateur builders, we found it invaluable to be able to walk through the entire building process, identify potential changes or optimizations, create material lists, plan the look, figure out the interior layout, and the list goes on, all before spending a single dollar or picking up a tool. You're looking at the 24-foot version of the Cider Box tiny house, modeled by myself in SketchUp. This home was originally built by Shelterwise, with plans available from Pad Tiny Houses, and now with this 3D model by Tiny Nest available as an add-on to those plans. I've spent hundreds of hours using this software, which is how I'm able to create comprehensive models like this, but anyone can put SketchUp to use in their first few hours with it because of its intuitive interface and tools. And starting with a model like this, which I've carefully laid out and organized, means that you don't have to start from scratch and learn the hard way. I've also made a SketchUp tutorial package that is meant to help you learn everything you need to understand the program and eventually create things this complex. Let's look at a few things that can be done with this model, and keep in mind this will barely scratch the surface of what is possible. SketchUp is 100% freeform, and every single object can be modified in any way you can imagine. I'll start with a quick tour. So I'll take off the door, change my viewing angle a bit, and head inside. We can see that the kitchen is in the center, when we're talking lengthwise, of the tiny house, with stairs that lead up to the main sleeping loft. And below that, on the far end, is the bathroom with extra storage and place for a washer-dryer combo. And what I think is a very clever shower-bath combination, where we've got essentially a shower stall, but a bathtub that scoots underneath that shelving to allow you to have a regular bath as well. Heading out back to the other end of the tiny house, there's some auxiliary living space, which I've chosen to put a couch into, with a coat closet beside the doorway, a small desk, and above that is another loft big enough for a bed to make it a second sleeping loft, or it could be used for storage. In SketchUp, everything is to scale. There's a measuring tool that can be used to find the dimensions of any object. You can make sure all of the interior contents will fit, and whether or not any tweaks need to be made. And just as important, you can see the sizes of construction materials and even figure out cuts from it. But before we get to that, and while we still have all the finishing layers up, I'll go through how one might want to change the look and style of the house. This is the base style, which has a bit of a cabin feel to it, but for the sake of contrast, let's say you wanted a totally modern look. So what I'm going to do is open up my materials viewer, pin it, switch to list view, and open up the secondary selection pane, which means I can have editing open on the top, and then view all my materials in a list below. Now in any model, this list can quickly become cluttered. So what I've done to simplify the styling process is rename everything that's relevant with the word decor in all caps at the start. So these are the materials that I'll be modifying. Let's start by making all of the exterior trim white. So I'm going to select exterior trim, and under this picker, the best option for changing the brightness of something is HLS, because the bottom slider is lightness. So all I need to do is crank this to the max, and now we've got white trim. But it also still keeps a bit of that wood grain texture. Now let's turn the exterior siding and the fascia gray. HLS is also good for this because there's a saturation slider, so we can just pull this down, say most of the way, and see how that looks. Okay, that looks pretty cool. So let's go to fascia and do the same thing. Let's darken the roofing a little bit. This is looking pretty sleek, but I'd argue that we've taken out too much color, so let's make the door red. First, I'll crank up the color and change it to red. So you can see there's something a bit funky going on here, and this is because some textures don't like their colors changed so dramatically. So we could find another texture image online and import it, but for simplicity, I'm just going to uncheck this Use Texture Image to default back to a solid color. Now we can see that it's a bit too bright, so let's turn that down. Okay, we'll go with that for now. So let's head inside and see if we can apply this theme to the interior as well. Okay, so how about a darker floor, white cabinets, white walls, and darker trim? Now, once again, I don't want to take out all the color, and I'm certainly no interior designer, but I think that the lighter wood doesn't really fit, so I'm going to darken things down again. Okay, let's turn around and see what's left behind us. So I'll darken the desk chair a bit. Let's make the bedding match the door. And since I took out the blue, I'll sneak some of that Tiny Nest blue back in by doing it on the couch here. So colorizing this texture made a bit of a pattern emerge, but we'll just call it plaid for now. So what's left down this way? I think we got pretty much everything. We could maybe darken these cabinetry handles a bit, but we can see that this bed also took on that red, and there's definitely some things we'd want to tweak to make it look just right, but just for a quick comparison and to see the concept, I think we've done a pretty good job. Alright, we're done with the materials for now, so I'm going to unpin this, but let's look at something else that can be done on the interior. What you see inside here is a representation of the original design's intended interior contents. But if you look on the left, you can see that I've got everything organized into layers. So we can actually strip away everything that's inside, including the bathroom wall, to have a completely blank slate so that you could fill the interior from scratch. But let's say you like most of this interior, but you really want to add a dishwasher. An awesome way of prototyping things like this is to use SketchUp's integrated 3D warehouse, which is a massive database of models shared by professionals and just other random SketchUp users. Anyone can contribute to it. So I'll just type in dishwasher and see what comes up. Alternatively, if you already owned the appliance or had your eye on something specific, you might get lucky and find that the manufacturer has already provided a model of that exact unit. So I'm going to scroll through here, have a quick look. Let's just grab this second one here. So I'll just download it straight into my model. And there it is. Now I'll see about scooting it underneath the countertop here. So you can get a quick idea of how it will interact with your cabinetry and if you need to make any adjustments. But now let's say that we want a bigger loft and we'll get rid of the stairs to add more counter space and do a ladder instead. So I'll just show it in fast forward, but what I'm doing is removing the stairs, extending the loft a bit, and then pulling a ladder off of the 3D warehouse. And there we go. We'd probably have to rebuild that railing if we wanted it. And I also tweaked over the dishwasher to the end of the cabinetry there. And I picked this ladder because I liked how kind of slightly goofy it looked. Obviously it's just a placeholder. But those changes took me mere minutes, so you can get an idea of the kind of things that you can do in here. And take my word for it, this is nothing compared to what's possible. Alright, let's have a quick look at the structure. So I'm going to back out and strip away all the layers right down to the trailer. I should mention that the Cider Box is optimized to be built on a Pad Series Iron Eagle tiny house trailer. Our own Tiny Nest is also built on an Iron Eagle trailer, and we personally recommend them. We've also worked with them to produce highly detailed 3D models of all of their trailers, which you can get from our Tiny Nest website, if you want to play around with different lengths. Since this is the 24-foot Cider Box, this is a 24-foot Iron Eagle trailer. This design calls for treated plywood as a bottom pan and undercarriage protection, and then floor framing on top of that. And one of the things we love about the Iron Eagle trailers is that this floor framing is built inside the trailer instead of on top of the deck, so that your subfloor sits level with the deck. Now I'll add all the framing and turn shadows back on to give a bit of perspective. I'll show you an example of modifying some framing, but first I'd like to point out a couple other things and show how some of the other layers all work together. It's in these layers that you can do a virtual build and really visualize every step of the process and how everything is going to fit together, and how you plan to make it happen. For example, let me back off some of the layers here, and let's just look at this upper window strip framing. If you have enough help or other means to lift this, you could build this all on the ground and then lift it into place. But if you're working by yourself, you might only be able to lift this one beam. You might get to this point, then lift that beam into position, and frame the rest in place. There are some things that are usually just figured out in the real world while you're building, such as your sheathing pattern, which might require some extra blocking to support a seam, or even the addition or repositioning of a few studs. Since I've basically gone through this imaginary build while making this model, I went ahead and chose a sheathing pattern that made sense for me, and made some small changes to accommodate it. My tweaks have been approved by the original designer as being reasonable in the context of building, and I wanted to point this out because there are some slight differences between the two-dimensional plans and this 3D model. It's not meant to be a one-to-one replica, but more of a complementary resource. Here's the sheathing pattern I went with. I tried to minimize wastage and use as many full sheets as possible. And if we go into X-ray mode, you can see that every seam has some kind of backing or studs to support it. Alright, now I'll briefly go through the rest of the layers so you can see how it all comes together. We've got the utility box on their own set of layers because it would be affixed after the building has been sheathed. We've got the fascia, the different roofing components, the tar paper here, and as you'll see, the house wrap is kind of a visual reminder that that is a layer that needs to go on during construction. This twinkling is just what happens in SketchUp when two objects intersect, in this case the house wrap and the roof flashing. But moving on, we have the windows, the window types, so we're saying that this is a casement window and this would be an awning, window trim, and keep in mind that this is the colors that we had modified earlier. So we got white window trim, door jamb, the door itself, exterior door trim, exterior corner trim, and this is made up of a 2x4 and a 2x3. Then we've got the exterior siding, and I wanted to point out that in this model I have it stood off 3/8 of an inch from the sheathing, and I'll actually just pull away the house wrap so it's more obvious. So this gap is 3/8 of an inch, and that's to allow for a rain screen, but that's optional, and the siding could be placed directly up against the sheathing depending on what kind of protective layer you're sandwiching in there. So I'll put the house wrap back on underneath there, and really the last thing outside is the soffit. The rest of the layers are the interior that we dealt with before. So that's it for the structure. The final thing I want to show is some editing on a structural level, so let's look at moving a window. Maybe this one back here. So I'm going to select all the layers that come after framing and hide them. Also, to make it easier to see, I can remove the what I have labeled as the right wall, which is the right because this would be facing forward, the direction of towing. So that's the right wall gone, and also the lower roof. There we go. So this wall is now easy to see. Now the window that we're going to be using is going to be the same size. So this rough opening needs to remain the same at 2 feet by 2'6". I want all the studs that are spaced at 16 inches to remain the same because that supports my sheathing pattern. So 1 foot 4 inches is 16 inches. And I want the rough opening to remain the same. But these king studs are not critical. So what I'm going to do is delete these, select what makes up the rough opening, and move this. Let's say we want to tuck it up close to this stud here. So I'll grab it, move it, lock it to the axis, and click to finish there. Since I put the window up against this stud, this has essentially become the king stud on this side, but I need one over here. So let's copy this one. There we go. And now it's just a matter of cleaning up the rest of the framing. So here we go. Just keep in mind that making a change to an early layer like this means that you'll have to make adjustments to all the subsequent layers that are related to it. So sheathing, siding, the window itself, trim, and so on. Luckily, this is all very easy. It's just a good idea to walk through all the layers to make sure they're keeping up with the changes that you're making. So now we can go all the way back to the interior and see how our window is positioned relative to the kitchen. And we can see that if we had stuck with those original stairs, that this placement wouldn't work. It's great to be able to experiment, make mistakes, and simply undo them with no harm done. So if you've made it this far in the video, thanks so much for watching. Hopefully I've convinced you that the Cider Box is a great tiny house, SketchUp is an amazing and powerful tool, and that I've made a model that's a great addition to the existing Cider Box plans. If you're watching this on YouTube, you'll find more information and links in the description, and no matter where you're viewing from, there'll be cards on the right, as well as tiles coming up on your screen now.